Welcome today. My name is Brooke Michael. I'm one of the advisors here at the University of Michigan Flint in our School of Nursing program. And today we're going to talk about early assurance into the MSN and DNP program. So this is an added value program for our BSN students, whether you're going to be or are a traditional BSN, accelerated second degree BSN, veterans BSN or aren't a BSN student that wants to continue your education into an MSN or DNP, which stands for Master's of Nurse or Doctorate of Nurse Practitioner program. We do have 4 different tracks. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. But what is the early assurance program? So it allows you to kind of hold your spot or hold your seat in our competitive admission nurse practitioner programs so that you have a seat in one of our programs. And we're going to talk about what the criteria is to hold that spot or hold that seat or get accepted into early assurance for all of our different tracks within our BSN programs. So first off, there are 4 different tracks that you can do. They're all nurse practitioner tracks. And this is the adult gero acute care nurse practitioner, the adult gero primary care nurse practitioner, the family nurse practitioner, and the psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. All 4 tracks are admitted like you're going into the DNP or Doctorate of Nurse Practitioner, but there is a stop out point for the MSN where you can set for your nurse practitioner exam, be done with your education, or continue on into the DNP curriculum. So now we're going to have a different slide for each of our different tracks. So I'm going to talk to my RN to BSN students first. Now, first off, for all tracks, whether it is traditional, accelerated veterans, or RN to BSN, this is the form that you fill out. It will be the same form that you fill out, and then you pick your program, and then it's going to go to different screens that'll ask you different questions based on the program that you are in. This is on this Google slideshow presentation along with on our website if you need this Google form. So for my RN to BSN students, again, you will fill out this form once you have successfully completed 4 of the required courses within the program, and those 4 classes are NSC 180 Legal and Moral Decision Making, Nursing 300 Theoretical Concepts, Nursing 307 Integrated Case Studies, and Nursing 316 Research in Nursing. Once you've completed those 4 classes, whether that's in your first semester with us, second semester, or third semester, whatever it is, once you've completed those 4 classes with a B plus or better, you must have a B plus or better in these 4 classes, you will fill out this Google form indicating when you're ready to start into the MSN and DNP curriculum. Now you must pick a start date that is past the time you will graduate. So you cannot pick a start date into the graduate level curriculum or into the MSN and DNP curriculum that is before you will graduate with your BSN. So I'm going to give an example. Let's say that you are going to graduate in December of 2025. The earliest that you could start into the MSN and DNP curriculum would be January of 2026. Now you can pick a future date. You can take semesters off after you graduate, but you cannot ever pick a start date that is before the time that you will graduate with your BSN. So keep that in mind when you're filling out the form. You do need to maintain an overall GPA at the University of Michigan Flint of a 3.5 or better. This does not count any classes that you took and transferred in. It doesn't count your associate's degree in nursing, but it does count any class that you took at the University of Michigan Flint. For example, if you took a general education class or an elective or a certificate class, that will count in your overall GPA of a 3.5 or better. So you need to maintain until you graduate a 3.5 GPA or better to keep your spot in the early assurance program. And so that, as I mentioned before, you can't pick a start date into graduate programs before you complete your BSN. So you can always talk to your advisor if you're not sure, look over that course plan and my degree plan and see when you're going to graduate. So now I'm going to talk about my traditional students. When can you fill out the form? You can fill out the form when you're a year away from graduating, which is traditionally your 4th semester within the BSN program. Not your 4th semester at the University of Michigan Flint, but your 4th semester after you've been accepted into the traditional program. Again, about a year out from graduating, that's when you're filling out this Google form. Again, same scenario, you must maintain an overall GPA of a 3.5 or better. Doesn't matter if you took anything at a previous college or it doesn't matter your high school GPA. This is just the classes that you've taken at the University of Michigan Flint. Again, that overall GPA for all programs needs to be what you graduate with. Your graduation date, you should have a 3.5 or better. If you drop below it at some point within your program, no worries as long as you get it back up to that 3.5 by the time you graduate. Again, that's an overall graduation GPA. So that means it's averaging every class you ever take. It doesn't mean that you must have a B+ or better in every single class that you've completed at the University of Michigan-Flint. What it means is it needs an overall or average GPA of 3.5. So if you did receive a C in a class at some point, no worries, as long as you have a few A's to help balance that out. And by the time you graduate, you have a 3.5 or better GPA, you're good to go. You will need to know your cohort number, and you'll need to know your grade in pathophysiology before you fill out the form. So make sure you've looked that up in your SIS account or ask your advisor so that you have it ready and available when you're filling out this form. Again, same scenario, you cannot pick a start date before you have graduated with your BSN. And for my traditional and ASD students, you cannot pick a start date that is before you've passed your NCLEX. So I used that example earlier for the RN to BSN student. If you're graduating in December of 25, the earliest you could pick was January of 26. Same scenario for you guys, but my RN to BSN students have already passed their nursing license. That is a quick turnaround for a student to graduate in December and then try to start into graduate programs and have their NCLEX passed by January. I do not recommend it. If you're graduating in a May term and you want to pick that following fall start, that's possible or more probable because you have May, June, July, and part of August basically to pass the NCLEX. It gives you a chance to retake if you need to. Again, you can always pick a start date in a future term. So even though you're graduating in December of 26, you could pick winter of 27. Don't recommend it, but you could also pick fall of 27 or winter of 28 or etc. Whenever those later dates are, but you cannot pick an earlier one. And again, as I mentioned before, you need to have your nursing license passed before you can start into that graduate level curriculum. So give yourself some wiggle room to potentially need to retake that. And we also always recommend that you have some work experience as a nurse before you get started to a graduate level curriculum. So it's always a good idea for my traditional ASD and veteran students who have not been working as a registered nurse yet to pick a future date at least 6 months to a year out past the time you graduate with your BSN. Get some work experience under your belt before you start into a graduate level nurse practitioner program. So ASD is going to be a lot of similar information, but for you, again, 1 year out, 1 year before you're ready to graduate with your BSN, but for you, that's traditionally about 2 semesters into the program. Again, same scenario, you need an overall GPA at the University of Michigan-Flint in a 3.5 or better. Doesn't matter what you have in your previous bachelor's degree or at high school or anything else that you transferred in, those don't count. It's just your classes that you've taken at the University of Michigan-Flint. So you get 3.5 GPA or better. Fill this form out when you're about a year away from graduating. Again, you need your cohort number, you need your grade in pathophysiology, so have those looked up so that you can quickly fill out that form. And then also same scenario, can't pick a start date prior to graduating with your BSN or prior to you passing your NCLEX. We also recommend that you have about a year's worth of work experience before you start into a graduate level curriculum. It is not a requirement to have a year's worth of work experience. It is a recommendation. But it is a requirement to have your BSN done and your NCLEX passed before you can start into that graduate level curriculum. So let's talk about the different deadlines. Now you can fill out that form as soon as you are met those criteria. For my Earn to BSN students, which you have a B+ or better in those 4 classes, fill out the form. And I recommend doing it earlier than later. Same thing for my traditional ASD veteran students. When you're within a year or right at a year from being ready to graduate, get this form filled out. Now these are the dates they're going to review it. So you don't have to have it filled out right by these days, but just know that they're not going to review the application again until one of these dates. So they review applications on October 1st, February 1st, and April 1st. So keep in mind, if you fill it out in June, let's say, they're not going to review it again until October. Go ahead and fill it out in June, that's fine, but just know you're not going to hear back until they meet again in October. You'll hear back about 2 to 3 weeks after these different deadlines, but again, fill out the form as soon as you're eligible. As soon as you've either completed those 4 classes with a B+ or better, or you're a year away from graduating, get that form filled out. and we're going to talk about why. So the other thing that you need to keep in mind is that after you filled out that Google form, right? You filled it out, you've gotten your acceptance letter. It said, congratulations, you're in the early assurance program. As long as you maintain that 3.5 GPA, your seat is held in the semester that you picked. This is your second step. Do not under or forget that you have a second step with this process. So Google Forms, your first step, you're a year from graduating. You do need to fill out the application within the deadlines of the semester you picked. So again, if you pick to start in the winter of 26, you need to have everything I'm going to talk about on the next slide turned in no later than August 15th, 2025. If you're doing a winter 26 start, all of the next page needs to be turned in by the August 15th, 2025. Let's say you were going to start in the fall of 26, right? You need to have everything turned in on the next slide by April 1st, no later than April 1st, 2026 for a fall start. So these are the graduate program application and the things that need to be turned in by the deadline of the semester you picked on that application. So again, remember, it's about 6 months before you're ready to start, or the semester you picked to start into graduate programs. So turn all of these things in. I'm not going to read all of these things to you, but make sure you fill out that application and turn all of these things in by the deadline. Once you fill out that application, they're going to start emailing you to get these things turned in. And then this stuff is on the slideshow and on the website. So I know you're fully capable of reading these things. Just make sure you get them turned in by that deadline. So the only thing I want to point out is you do need 3 letters of recommendation that can come from any of those 3 bullet points. You'll see one of those areas is a faculty from a recent nursing program. If you're currently in your BSN program, this is a good opportunity to ask your faculty, even if it's an online class, to be a letter of recommendation. Now, what I do recommend is asking the faculty while you're in the class, because even if you're not going to need that letter of recommendation for a year or 2, that's totally fine. But the faculty then a lot of times write themselves a little mental note about what to write in those letters of recommendations, so that when you ask them again for it in a year or 2, they can go back to that and remember how you participated in the class. So it's just giving them a kind of a heads up. So ask while you're in class. It's a great idea. Our faculty are almost always willing to do that for our students. And then the other thing is that you do have to turn in that goal statement. You'll see it there with a bunch of bullet points underneath it. Make sure you speak to each of those bullet points in your goal statement, or you are going to get it sent back and told to redo. You must speak to each of those bullet points in your goal statement. Don't skip over those just because you're not sure what your research interests are. Go ahead and write out what your research interests are. You won't be held to it. It's not like you're required to do those things, but you do need to list those out in your goal statement. Now I'm going to talk to students that are interested in the adult gero acute care track only. This is only students that are interested in acute care. If you are not interested in acute care, let's say you're interested in gero primary, psychiatric, or family, you can ignore what I'm about to say. This is not applicable to those 3 tracks, only acute care. Acute care students, you must have 1 year work experience as a nurse in a critical care unit before you can start into this program. So for my RN to BSN students, you could absolutely have this or be getting this experience while you're in the program. But for my traditional ASD or veterans BSN students, you won't have this experience until after you've graduated and passed your NCLEX. So keep in mind that, again, when you're picking that early assurance start date, again, let's use a December 25 graduate. The earliest you could start then would be winter of 27, right? Because you need a full year of work experience in a critical care unit after you've passed your NCLEX. So we list out what we consider critical care units and the experiences we would like you to have. If you don't see your experience, or you think that it's considered critical care, but you don't see it listed, feel free to email Julie. Her email is at the bottom of this slideshow here, and you can email her your experience and she'll let you know if it would qualify. Other things to keep in mind for this track only, you do need ACLS and BLS certification, and you also have to complete 2 of the clinicals in Michigan. This is an online program, and the clinicals are done in your area for the MSN and DNP program. So if you have to move out of state, there is an opportunity to potentially complete this program, but keep in mind that you do need, for this track only, to be able to be in the state of Michigan for 2 of those classes clinical hours. So now I'm going to talk about some common questions that a lot of students have. And so the first one is, can I repeat a class or a course to get a better grade, to improve my GPA? Absolutely you can, but we always recommend speaking to your advisor before you do that. It might not be necessary. Keep in mind, when you graduate with your bachelor's degree, your GPA is set in stone. You cannot improve your GPA once you have graduated. So if you're wanting to improve your GPA, you must do that before you graduate or extend your graduation in order to improve your GPA. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you're considering improving your GPA, the best, quickest, fastest, cheapest way to do that is to retake the exact class. Now, I know sometimes there's classes you don't want to retake. Maybe you have a low grade in a math or a statistics class, and you're like, I hated that class and I don't want to retake it. But here's how improving your GPA works. Let's say you take Soc 215, general statistics. Let's say you got a D in it. That's good enough to graduate, right? But it's dropping your GPA by quite a bit. If you retake that exact class at the same university, so you take Soc 215, general statistics again with us, and you get an A, that D grade is still going to be on your transcript, but it will not be calculated in your GPA. Only the A grade will be calculated in your GPA. So it's like the D grade does not exist in the calculation. Whereas if you just take another class, it's just going to average out all of your classes in there. So again, speak to your advisor if you're thinking about doing that, but you absolutely can. What if I need to choose a different start date than the one I picked in my original application? Then you go into the regular applicant pool. It is very critical that you pick the date you're going to start into graduate programs. So again, that's why we are having you wait until you're about a year away from graduation, because traditionally you have a pretty good idea when you're going to graduate at that point. But keep in mind that if you pick a different date, your early assurance is gone. It's not holding that seat because it was holding that seat in that semester you picked. Now you'll go into the regular graduation application pool, and you'll have we take a high preference to our own students because we know you're well educated and you're prepared for graduate programs, but just know that you don't have the seat held. Can I take time off? Once you start into your MSN and DNP curriculum, we do not recommend that because the classes are built upon themselves. So you can't just take a semester off and then start back into the next semester's class. You need to complete those classes because the content in those classes is needed to be successful in the next classes. Some classes are only offered 1 time a year. So if you take a semester off, it could delay your graduation up to a year. So just keep that in mind. Can RN to BSN students transfer in any of those pre-admission courses, that Nursing 300, 307, 316, or Nursing Support Course 180? Yes, you absolutely can transfer those in. You don't have to retake them with us in order to do early assurance, but you must have a grade of a B+ or better in that class. So if you transferred in NSC 180 for example, and the grade was a B or a B-, that's good. It meets our requirement for our program, but not early assurance. So you may want to consider retaking it with us to get that B+ if you want early assurance. Again, before you do that, make sure you speak to your advisor. What is the BSN to DNP with MSN application deadline is before I hear back about early assurance. So this is critical. So this is a big one. Remember, we went over, there's 2 things you're filling out, right? You're filling out the early assurance application and the graduate program application, right? And the graduate program application is due about 6 months before you start into graduate programs. This is why it's critical to fill out the Google form for early assurance as soon as you're eligible. So as soon as you've completed those 4 classes, or as soon as you are 1 year away from graduating, or at least close to 1 year away from graduating, get that early assurance form filled out. Because if you wait and only fill out early assurance and then the graduate program application comes due before your early assurance application is turned in, you cannot get early assurance. Early assurance must be in and accepted before whatever that application deadline was for graduate programs. So again, you're filling that out at least a year in advance before you're wanting to start into graduate programs, and then you're filling out the graduate program application 6 months in advance. Same scenario if you are about to graduate with your BSN, or you've already graduated with your BSN from the University of Michigan-Flint, you cannot get early assurance. So again, as soon as you are about a year away from graduating, get that early assurance form filled out so that you're not running into the graduate program applications deadline. How long does it take? So for the MSN, so remember how I told you in the beginning that every student is admitted like they're going all the way to the DNP or the Doctorate of Nurse Practitioner, but there is a stop out for the MSN where you can sit and get your nurse practitioner exam or continue on. So to get to the MSN, from the day you start into graduate programs to the day you can graduate with the MSN, for a part-time student it is 2 years and 8 months. For a full-time student is 1 year and 8 months. To get to the DNP, it's just 1 more year, so 1 year past the MSN, for a total from the day you start into graduate programs to the day you graduate with a DNP. Part-time student, 3 years and 8 months. Full-time student, 2 years and 8 months. As you can see, just 1 year past the MSN. Can I work full-time? Once you start into the MSN and DNP curriculum, it depends on if you're a full-time student or a part-time student. I know you just saw to get to the MSN, it takes 1 year and 8 months, and you're like, yep, that's the track I want. I want to do that one. I want to be done in 1 year and 8 months. Those students are not working full-time. It is almost impossible. There's not enough hours in the week to work full-time and go to school full-time. So if you are wanting to go through the program full-time, keep in mind that those students are either not working at all or maybe working a few hours here and there, like PRN. If you need to work full-time, even going to school part-time will be difficult. It will consume a lot of your time between full-time work and part-time school. So just keep that in mind. It can be done. We don't regulate it, but it is difficult even then to take on full-time work and part-time school. How many classes do I take each semester? A part-time student is going to take an average of 2 classes a semester, where a full-time student will take an average of 4 classes a semester. And then students often ask us, why should I go on to that DNP, that Doctor of Nurse Practitioner, and not just stop at the MSN? So for any student that is planning to be in the field or be a nurse practitioner for 10 years or more, we highly recommend that you get the DNP. So legislation still allows nurse practitioners to hold their MSN and be a nurse practitioner, but they're moving towards requiring the DNP. Now, once you have the MSN, you're grandfathered in. They can't take that away from you. You can always be a nurse practitioner, but it's about jobs. Jobs are starting to require for nurse practitioners to have their DNP, and if that legislation goes through, you're going to see that increasing even more, where they were going to want the DNP. So if you're planning on practicing in the field more than 10 years, we highly recommend just taking that additional year and finishing out the DNP. The next steps, we always suggest just talking to your advisor. You can either email your advisor or book an appointment with your advisor if you haven't created that course plan with your advisor. It's the same link whether you're traditional ASD veterans or RN to BSN. Traditional and ASD veterans BSN students, there's only face-to-face appointments in Flint, and then they have phone and virtual appointments. RN to BSN, we have Flint and Lansing location face-to-face appointments. We also have extended time slots appointments for Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. You're just going to speak to your regular advisor, making sure your plan's up to date and ready to go. If you've already done that recently, you do not need to book another appointment, and you don't need to reach out to your advisor. This is just recommended if you don't have an updated course plan, or if you haven't worked on a course plan with your advisor or haven't been following the course plan that you created with your advisor originally. So tuition, once you start into the MSN and DNP curriculum, it'll be the tuition of that year. You can look on that link when you get closer to tuition changes traditionally every fall. So make sure you're just looking at that different tuition rates to see what your tuition would be in that particular semester. We do offer some different scholarships in the Nursing Faculty Loan Forgiveness Program. So if you have questions or are interested in that, please read through those different links. And then these are your Earn to BSN advisors. Again, you can reach out to one of us if you have questions about early assurance, or if you have questions about your course plan. These are our contact information. Same thing with the traditional BSN, ASD BSN, or Veterans BSN. These are your advisors, and you can reach out to your advisor if you have questions about your cohort number, that grade and pathophysiology, or making sure your course plan is up to date and you know when you're going to graduate. So that's the end of our presentation. We want to thank you so much for joining today. And if you have additional questions, please reach out to your advisor. Thanks and have a great day.